Hi guys. I'm very happy today that I'm not doing the webinar, so that's a good start. We've got most of the Gear team here today, and we're excited to have Ian take us through some of the new features in Smaart, and with a focus on the new SPL function. So Smaart 8's been around for a long time, and this latest version has added quite a bit in terms of SPL measurements and logging and things along those lines. So with a lot of these changes, we thought it would be useful to have a look at where it was and where it is now, and have Ian demonstrate some of those features. So he's got a full kit ready to go and to take you through doing these SPL measurements with Smaart. So um, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we were pretty informal, so don't hesitate to jump in and ask a question when necessary. So over to you, Ian.
All right, let's get at it. So thanks for taking the time to come and hang out today. I'm going to just go in on the close shot here kind of quickly just to give you an idea of what I got going on here. I'm running Smaart version 8 and Smaart SPL. The version 8 that I'm running is the beta. So there's a couple of new features that get released in the betas, and I think that beta is due for public release pretty shortly. So it should be pretty quick that you get your hands on it. So I'm using a Roland Octacapture to bring in audio from one microphone here that we're going to calibrate. It's calibrated now, but we'll redo that. I also have a calibrator here to do that. I have another calibrator, a B&K, that works nicely on this microphone because it's the appropriate size. So this is a 10EZ interface and the matching microphone, and we'll get into 10EZ a little bit later on as well. This microphone and this interface are calibrated together and locked, so it's a traceable solution, unlike a microphone like this where you can change the calibration and maybe fiddle with the numbers a little bit. So that's what's kind of pertinent about this over a standard microphone. And this is just one of the interfaces that you can use with Smaart. It's one of the more popular ones because it actually is controlled within Smaart, and Smaart is aware of the input sensitivity of the microphone, so you can actually change the input sensitivity and not throw your calibration off. So if you are doing SPL related things and you want to have calibration, this is one of the better choices to use as an interface. So I'm going to jump over to a little bit of a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my desktop and fire this on. And I want to get rid of my little tray here. There we go. We'll get Zoom insists on putting some things on the screen that I don't want. So, like I said, we're going to talk about two different things today, Smaart version 8 and how the SPL toolset works inside of Smaart version 8. And then what Smaart did, or what Rational did a couple of years ago, is they took all the SPL features of version 8 and they packaged it into another standalone application called Smaart SPL, which is a more cost-effective solution if you don't need to do all the other measurement stuff that Smaart Live does. You can just do Smaart SPL. Come on. There we are. So what we're going to run through today is just a little overview of all the Rational Acoustic solutions. We're going to talk about the issue of loudness in venues, concerts, events, etc. We're going to talk a little bit about defining SPL, and we're going to add on a couple of metrics to that. And then we're going to discuss some of the challenges surrounding the measurement of it and the enforcement of any legislations or rules that have been put in place. And then we're going to take a deep dive into the software. So Rational Acoustics, just in case folks don't know, it's a company built in Putnam, Connecticut. I think it's 13 years now that Rational Acoustics has existed, and they are the sole owner and support structure and developer of all the Smaart products. And you can contact them for any support, or you can contact us for any support questions or what have you. So the first problem that we have, and the question is, why are so many events so loud? And this kind of goes back a long way to, I think this picture is a Pink Floyd show back in the 70s. So you'll notice that there's a huge ground stack PA there, and we still have to get a good level of audio to the back of the room, which might be 200, 300 feet away at times. So back in the old days, when I was first starting, this is how we did it. We stacked huge piles of speakers on a deck, 4 or 6 or 8 feet above everybody's head, and we turned them up as loud as we had to get them to get the sound of the back of the room. Unfortunately, the people in the front got pummeled. So my key, I'm going to have to click. There we go. So now we have better solutions at hand. We have flown systems and we have line array systems where we can focus the energy and in an attempt to get a more even sound pressure across the entire audience area. And that is part of the critical solution that comes into play. Without a good system design and a good system deployment, even if you are managing the sound pressure in the venue or at the event, there are can still be a lot of areas where it's too loud up front, maybe off in the wings, various things, or some places where it's not loud enough and the audience isn't getting the same experience as the engineer is intending them to have. So basically, this is what it works out to. Is this is just a deck stacked MSL4 that I threw into map earlier today. So this speaker is 4 meters above the floor and the listener is a couple meters above the floor. And we got a 13 dB difference, A-weighted, from the front row to the back row. And all we do is fly the MSL4 and you can see the difference. So proper deployment is part of it. And now with line arrays, we have even a better chance of getting it right. The main problem that we have involved in all this SPL stuff and rules and regulations and discussions is subjectivity. One person says it's too loud and the other person says, it's fine. I like it. So there's a whole bunch of things that come into play when we're talking about the subjectivity of things and issues that causes. And that's, of course, SPL that's acceptable for one person is not acceptable for another. The tonality of the system plays into it. Distortion components in the system play a part of it. The more distortion, the more our sense of loudness increases. Cleaner sound always sounds quieter. Sound pollution is another problem that we run into, and we have what we call the cranky neighbor. So if you have a concert and outside the perimeter of the concert, you may have somebody who has just made up their mind that they don't like it and it doesn't belong. So unless we have a really defined way of measuring it and policing it and specifying exactly what those regulations are, if we don't have a clear target to be met and a way of accurately measuring that, then we have it all becomes subjective. It's just every one person's opinion over another. And so that's where it comes into the whole bylaw infringement and enforcement. And without clear rules and a clear methodology for measuring the sound pressure across the duration of an event, it just becomes an argument. So real quick, sound pressure is the measure of the change above and below the static pressure. We have pressure and we have reduction in pressure, but it's just the amplitude. And it's a logarithmic scale because that corresponds to our perception of loudness. We express it in SPL using the decibel, which is a ratio of change. It's 20 log. 0 dB SPL is the threshold of human hearing, and 120 dB SPL is considered roughly the threshold of pain, although that does change a little based on age. So this represents a 1,000,000 to 1 ratio on a linear scale. So it's quite a dramatic we have quite a dramatic window of sensitivity. So some of the metrics that we use are weighting curves. So a Z weighting, if you hear SPL Z weighted or unweighted, that means there's no frequency compensation anywhere across the spectrum. It's basically we're averaging and looking at the SPL across all frequencies, 20 to 20K. If we do a C weighting, we have a little reduction in low end and we have a little more reduction in the high end. And then we have what's known as A weighting. And A weighting, you can see, is fairly dramatic. There's a lot of low frequency energy that gets pulled out whenever we're doing an A weighted measurement, and also a little bit of the high. A weighting is predominantly focused on speech intelligibility. That's why the peak of the hump is right in the middle of where we're most sensitive for speech intelligibility. Interestingly enough, though, A weighting corresponds to our sensitivity to damage. So we suffer damage more quickly in the higher registers of the audio than we do in the lower registers. That's not to say that you can have your subwoofers running 40 dB louder than your mains and get away with it, or crush the crowd up against a huge pack of subs and it's okay. But in general, the A weighting is considered to kind of track the danger frequencies. So there's also time constants involved when we get into doing SPL measurements. Fast is 125 milliseconds if you're looking at a fast SPL measurement on a meter or a fast ballistic on a RTA. Slow is a 1 second interval. Basically, it's averaging out everything over 1 second. LEQ means equivalent level over time, and that we can adjust that. So there's a way to put in a number that will define how long that averaging is going to take. And then the other one that you sometimes see is L max, and that's the highest level. It basically, think of it as a peak detector. It just holds the highest SPL that it sees over the course of the event, and that's what you get. So this is an example of a 30-minute show, 30-minute chunk out of a concert, and it's SPL slow. And you can see that there's quite a wide variation. I mean, the peak is 97. The lowest value is around 70. So if I show this to somebody and I say, well, how loud was the show? They're going to go, oh, I don't know. When in the show? Right at 22 minutes or 3 minutes into the show, it was kind of loud. So this doesn't work so well when we're trying to derive a specification for quantifying how loud an event is. What we prefer to use is LEQ, level equivalent, which is the equivalent continuous sound pressure level. So it's really useful to use this when we're categorizing events that have fluctuating levels over time. You might have a loud song, a soft song. You might have somebody who talks a lot between songs. Ultimately, we want to get the average level of the event. So this is how it basically looks. It allows for a concise specification to be drawn up and a concise way of measuring it and making sure that we're meeting that specification or that legislation that's in place. It's written LEQ 10, which means it's a 10-minute average and there's no weighting. Or if you see something like LAEQ 15, that's a 15-minute average and it's an A-weighted measurement. So that's just, if you see the acronyms, that's basically how they break out and what they mean. So that's what it looks like. That's the SPL slow with the LEQ 10-minute average laid over top of it. So you can see that the average over that 30 minutes fluctuates from, I don't know if I peer in on this with my bad vision, 89 to 80, 87, 86. So there's not that much variance. It's not as bad as the SPL slow looks. So the question that everybody wants to know is how loud and for how long, because we're talking about exposure. It's not unlike putting a a radiation dosimeter on your chest and going into a nuclear reactor where you work for the day, and it's important for you to know how much radiation you may have been exposed to over a period of time. It's the same thing. We're talking about exposure to sound pressure over a period of time. So occupational health and safety has what are called permissible exposure levels. And this is the threshold of liability for an employer. It's not necessarily what's safe, considered what's safe. The thing to note here, if you look at the table, is that your allowable exposure time cuts in half every time we see a 5 dB increase in level. And then there's the NIOSH, National Institute of Safety and Health, which are the recommended exposure levels. So this is what is considered a safe dose. Exposure time halves every 3 dB of increase. And if you think of acoustic power, we're talking about power, so 3 dB is twice the energy. So if we're getting twice the energy, we should only have it for half the time. This is some data that was collected by Michael Lawrence at Rational Acoustics. The green ones are him mixing, not me mixing, but him mixing. And the blue ones are not him mixing the show. And he basically gathered up all this data over several different shows that he went to and measured. So you can see some of these are, I'll just go down the 4 numbers first. The top number is the max. So that is the maximum level, the L max. Then he took a measurement that has an L of 10 minute, and then a 50 minute and a 90 minute. So in this classic rock show, 95.2 for the duration of the show, which is about 62 minutes, that represented 98% of your daily dosage for sound. This one here, 95-minute show, was only 89 over 50 minutes. So that was only 62%. And they vary across. What happens, though, is it gets scary when we get down into some of the longer shows and the louder shows. Is this country show, for instance, produced 411% of your daily dosage, your daily safe dosage for sound pressure level. This progressive rock show that went for 170 minutes long is 1,000% of your daily dosage. So one might say this is not too bad if you go to 4 shows a year, maybe. But the part that we're not putting into this equation is that patrons go to shows every so often, but the people who work the shows go to every show. So if you're doing 4 shows a week, 5 shows a week, if you're in a club and you're part of the bar staff or the wait staff, or if you're the lighting tech on a show, or anybody working on a show all the time, musicians on stage as well. And then you get into the metal show that goes for 350 minutes, 5 acts across the stage for an entire afternoon. And we're on 1,400% of our daily dosage of sound pressure. So it gets a little bit scary. And it's something that I think that an industry as a whole, we need to take considerably more seriously. I kind of think of it as if you had to give everybody in the audience sunglasses in case the lasers hit them in the face, everybody would freak out. If you had to give all the musicians SPF 50 because there was too much UV light from the lighting rig, everybody would freak out. But it's considered completely okay to show up at a concert with a set of earplugs in your pocket to protect yourself, which frankly I think is ridiculous. So, like I said, Michael Lawrence from Rational Acoustics was gracious enough to share some of his data with me for this presentation. He did an excellent video on this that's about 40 minutes long, and it's available on YouTube. Pete's going to copy these two URLs into the chat for anybody who might want to partake. The other page that's really, really useful is Rational Acoustics has a really excellent guide. It's aptly named the SPL guide, and it runs through all these kind of parameters in detail and shows you stuff about how to set up software and things like that. So that's some home study kind of stuff. We have the configurator in Smaart that is where you go to start doing all this configuration. So that ends the boring or mundane part of the PowerPoint. We're going to jump into the software and start fiddling with software. I'll exit that and jump over to Smaart and make it a little bigger. If anybody has any thoughts or questions, please toss them into the chat, and I'd be glad to. Anything that anybody might like me to look at specifically. If you see anything, Jeff, let me know.
You're good to go.
Sounds good. Keep on trucking. So in Smaart, there is configuration, and there's I/O configuration and configuration for measurements, and then SPL configuration. So I'm just going to start with the I/O configuration, and this window is where you pick your audio devices that you want to pull audio from. One of the key things you have to remember is whenever you're using Smaart, Smaart looks to the operating system for audio sources and audio destinations. So whatever you're using as an interface, an octocapture or whatever it is, it needs to be plugged in and it needs to be recognized by the operating system on your computer before you start Smaart. Same thing goes for if you're doing it with Dante and you have if you're using Dante Virtual Sound Card as a source, you need to have Virtual Sound Card up and running and turned on before you start Smaart, or it won't recognize it. You'll have to quit Smaart and go back and start over. So you end up with a list. My list is kind of long because I plug a lot of stuff in over time. But anything that you want to use as a source in Smaart, you tick the use box. So here I've ticked the use box for my generator. So that's the internal generator, the internal signal generator. I have my octocapture. So if I select the octocapture, I get the list of all the inputs, pardon me, that are available on the octocapture. And to keep things simple, I've only chosen the inputs that I want to use today. So I'm using one, actually I'm not even using two anymore. I did that a different way, so I'll get rid of that one. I'm using input 1, which is the microphone. And input 7 I'm playing some music out of iTunes into the octocapture just as something rolling in the background that I can do some logging on and whatnot. And then I have input 8, which is my reference. That's my noise output. So if we do some measurements of a loudspeaker later or something like that, I have my reference and I can do transfer function. So if I jump over to SPL config, the first part of configuring SPL is defining what devices you're going to use to capture from. So I'm using my octocapture. I could choose the generator or my octocapture, or I can choose my 10EZ, which is my USB. And I can then define any type of measurement I want. So what I've done is I've defined 5 meters. The width is 5 meters and the height is 1 meter. I could do it 4 by 4. I could do it one column by a bunch of meters vertically. I can lay them out in whatever configuration I want, and I can show them on the screen like that. And I can say always on top. That keeps it up on top. So even if I go to other parts of the program, the meters stay on top for me. And because I'm 5 by 1, that equals 5 meters, and that's why I have a list of 5 meter inputs that I can select from. The second part of the meter configuration, or the SPL configuration, is logging, and I've actually got logging running. So I'm going to stop it you can't alter it when it's running. So you can set a logging interval. That's the first thing. You can log every second, every 3 seconds, every 10 seconds, or whatever you want. And basically it just pushes the data into the log file. The log files are just text files. They're easily readable. When you configure the log, you get to see whatever inputs you have available, and only inputs that are calibrated are available to be logged. You can't log an uncalibrated input because that would give you pretty erroneous data. So that's how you pick the inputs that you want to see represented in the log, and then you can start the logging, and it will continuously pull data in or push data into the log file. So calibration is, if I go back to IO config, in order to calibrate a input, you have to have a calibration offset. Smaart looks for this number in here. If a calibration offset exists for that input, then it is considered to be calibrated and can be used for SPL measurement. So the calibration offset comes from actually picking the input, hitting the calibrate button, and then I'm going to jump over to this. I'm still in the small picture there. Yeah. So if I turn the calibrator on, the calibrator is set for 94 dB, which is actually 1 Pascal. These calibrators are made by SMCon, and they do 94 or they do 110. I use 94. It's easy. It's considered a standard. So basically, put the calibrator on the microphone and you hit calibrate. So what this does is it measures the actual dBFS, dB full scale, digital input that's coming in from the octacapture, and puts an offset in to make it 94. And if your calibrator doesn't do 94 dB, there's a little spot there. By default, it comes up at 94. But if I was calibrating at 110, I could come in and put 110 dB because that's my calibrator level. And I could redo the calibration with 110 dB source or 114 dB source. But that's why I picked 94, because it's already in there. And so I go OK to accept it, and my offset is 110.7 dB. So I go OK, and I say OK. You can't do anything in Smaart when either of these dialog boxes are open. They're modal dialog boxes, and they cut you out of the program while they're open. So you have to say, all right. So as you can see, I come over here to my octacapture mic 1, and I'm reading 93.9 dB. And the interesting thing is we use 1K as a calibration tone. And the reason we use 1K is if you go back to the chart in your mind of the different weightings, all the weightings match at 1K. So it doesn't matter what weighting you choose. If you're putting a 1K tone into a microphone, it will always come up at the same level. That's why they all match at that frequency. So I can pick whatever weighting or unweighted that I want. Peak is a little different. It's the peak of the sine wave, so that's why that one's different. There's a 3 dB crest factor on a sine wave. 94, 97. It's actually measuring the peak of the wave, not the RMS value of the wave. All the other ones are based on RMS values. So that's how you calibrate an input. I'm going to go back to the SPL config. I can pick different metrics that I want. I've created a couple of these metrics. They're not by default in the program. And to create them, you can go to the advanced meter config, and this is where I built these. I set a time for 2, 5, and 10, and I selected some weighting. And then I have this other one here that says exposure N. I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to make it exposure O. And you'll notice that all the other parameters get blanked out. And this is one of the things that was released 1 or 2 versions ago in Smaart. And this is exposure N, which corresponds to the NIOSH specifications, and exposure O corresponds to the OSHA. So what you get when you select these metrics is you get a percentage of your daily dosage. That's what comes up in the meter. So if I add another meter, I'll just make this 6. Actually, I'll make it 7. Why not? Because I want a 7th one. So this one I will pick lock to capture, and I'll leave it on mic 1. And for this one, I'm going to pick exposure N. And for this one, I'm going to select exposure O. And then if I show the meters, close this. There. And these meters are completely resizable. I can do whatever I want with these on the screen. So the dBA slow is, this is my music input playing out of iTunes. You'll notice that all the ones that have the LEQ, this is a 1-minute LEQ, a 2-minute, a 5-minute, and a 10-minute. There's a little yellow bar that slowly progresses across the meter. And that gives you the indication of how much time that meter has been running, because in order to calculate the LEQ1, there has to be a full minute of data in the buffer. So that shows you the percentage of how much the buffer is full. And once this gets all the way across, you'll see it in about 10 or 15 seconds here. It'll turn green, which means the buffer is full, and that number is now valid. Until that turns green, it hasn't accumulated enough data to give you a valid number. So that's why there's a progress bar on all these meters. Exposure N and exposure O don't have progress bars because they're measuring SPL over time and relating that back to a daily dosage regimen. So there's less parameters available there. Just take a couple of questions if anybody has anything off the top of their head at the moment.
The daily dosage, what is that? 4.6, is it percent? Is it dB? What is that?
It's in percent. It's in percent of your 100% daily dosage. So I'll put the meters away, and I'm just going to jump back and look at the SPL config again. And I should have turned logging on before, again, so we'd have something in the log. But when you start logging, like I say, this is writing data to the log file at an interval of every 3 seconds. When I'm logging, I can hit the SPL history button, and that opens up a window that shows me the history over time of my SPL. So this will just keep growing over time. You can look at a live plot that's running currently in the software, or you can open up historical files as well. You can go back and reopen shows that you've done in the past. Since this one doesn't have much data, let's see if I can find the most recent log from the one I had running earlier today. Let's see if that one, well, that one's not very long.
Is there any limits on how long you can run the log for, or is it just, as long as you've got space?
The log will run for 24 hours and then it will restart itself. So it will run continuously, but it will restart after a period of time so that the file size doesn't get obnoxiously large. That one's a bit bigger. Let's see what's in this file. There we go. There's one that's a little bit longer. So this is a historical file that I've opened that I'm looking at. And then you can use these little markers. The upper window always shows you the full scale of the time window. And then there's a little marker at each end. So I can drag this marker in like this, and I can drag the one in from the other end, and that gives me a zoomed in window. So I can zoom in on a particular event or a particular time window that I'm interested in. The other thing that is interesting in SPL config is config is alarms. Oh, I have to stop logging to turn on alarms. So you can do an alarm configuration. So I could set this, let's see, what am I, 93 here? And what's my music input? I'm just going to jump back for a second and see what the music is running at. If I look at my music input, we got 70, around 70. Okay. So I can set an alarm, and if I set it at maybe 80, and I can set it for all calibrated inputs, so, or I can set it for a specific input. So I'm just going to set it for the music input, and I'm going to say okay. And now if I show my meters, I'm going to turn logging back on as well, because I want logging on, because this is a demonstration of the logging part of alarms as well. So what this does is it places an alarm, a target for an alarm level. So on the music input that is dB SPL slow, what I can now do is if I open up my input for music and I crank it up a bit, what you'll see, whoops, meters, view meters, SPL meters. I should have said stay on top. There, you'll see that this is blinking. It's telling me now that I've exceeded my 80 dB target alarm. And if I look at, if I go back to SPL config and I say, show me the SPL history, and I look at, oh, I'm not looking at the right mic. I want to be looking at my music input. You'll see that what it does is it installs, it inserts flags in the log every time the alarm level is hit. So that you can set an alarm, and even if you're not standing in front of the meters and watching them all the time, you will still see alarm events. They get popped into the log, and it tells you right there the alarm and the time that it happens. The other thing that this also does is there are 3 color configurations for the meters. So your text in your meter, if it's below 80 dB, the meter text will be green. If I hit 100 dB, the text in the meter will become yellow. And if I hit 103, it'll be red. So I could change these to be, 70, 80, and perhaps 85. So I do that. And I want that to be for my SPLA slope. Actually, I'll just apply to all. Yes, apply it to all. Okay. I'm going to keep these on top. Stop the logging and turn off the alarms, because that's, and go. Okay, the alarm runs for 6 seconds. So if it does see a peak that exceeds the alarm level, it'll keep flashing for 6 seconds, even if it isn't, even if it's no longer above the alarm level. Quickly see if I can push this to, not quite.
What do those entries look like in the logs, Ian? Are they pretty obvious?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to jump to the reporting part of the log here momentarily. I can't quite push that to where. Oh, that's why, because I want the DBA fast, SPLA fast. So get rid of that for a second. SPL history, that's what I want. I'll go back and open up one of those other files that has a lot of data, so we have something to look at. Yeah, that one I think was the one. That's weird. I think it's complaining to me. There we go. So once I can do this by either running a live SPL history, which is continuously logging, and then I could also do this procedure for a log file that I have stored and I've reloaded. But what it is you generate a report. So you can choose, when you generate a report, you can choose what metrics you want to see. If I want to see peak C or A fast, LEQ over 1, LEQ 10, and then I go create. And they should end up in documents, Smaart version 8. Reports. Nope. Select all. LEQ1, LEQ10. Open the file location when I've done it. And let's pick SPL fast as well. So that's fast, LEQ1, LEQ10, and create. And then open, there it is. So here's our, actually, I'll just open it with preview. So here's our report. So in the report, you get a bunch of information on the front end, what the source was, what the input source was, the date, the software versions and stuff like that. You get some immediate numbers, which is the max with all the different weightings and time and frequency weightings, and an L10, an L50, and an L90. There's just a blanket set of metrics that you get right out of the gate on the report. If there's alarms, you get a list of every alarm and when it happened, and then you get the thumbnails. So that's an overview. The four different metrics that I selected when I made the report go in the overview, and then below that, each individual one is broken out on its own graph, showing the level. So that's the reporting. And like I say, you can do the reporting either live or post. So that's about it, except for one other small piece. You can run SPL in Smaart 8, or you can run the standalone SPL program. And if it doesn't matter either one that you have running, you can connect to it. It has its own built-in web server. So you can connect to it with a web browser from anywhere, in the building, out of the building, anywhere in the world. So if I go over here, this is, I'm just coming back to my own machine here. That's my IP. That's what you get. You can create more meters if you want. I can create another meter and select what I want it to be and select the parameters, LEQ1. So you can build your own little metering and log file viewing window in a web browser and run it all the time anywhere you like. And the way to do that is under options, there's the API. And all you have to do is go to options, and under the API, you enable the API. There's a port number here, which is 26,000. And then this tells you what the IP address of your computer is. And you just type that in. It's the IP address with a colon and then the port number. And that gets you the web page with all the data. You can, if you're nervous, you can click this button here and you can enter a password, and you can password protect the access to the web server so other people can't sneak a peek at what you're up to. That is about it as far as all the different parameters that are available.
Is there a limit to the number of mics you can do the SPL measurements on simultaneously?
No, I'm not sure that there's a practical or a limit to the number of mics. I've done it with 6 microphones. I don't think there is a practical limit. I think you can run as many as you want. The one piece of the puzzle that I didn't have a chance to jump into is, get over there, SPL config. Because I have the 10EZ microphone and the calibrated 10EZ interface box, those can't be tampered with. I can turn on display MAM, and I can put a venue name in here, Ger, and I can put my limits in there if I want. And once I turn that on and I go to view meters, these bars are what you get if you own the 10EZ software, if you buy a 10EZ software package with the microphone. But we've also implemented it into Smaart. And what these bars do is they give a front of house engineer the ability to see, if you have it set to an LEQ 15, I think this is set to LEQ A15, right? So if you see 5 green bars, you know that you have room to increase your level safely. It's a look ahead for the LEQ is what it is. It's a predictive type of software application. It says, if you continue your current trend, you're going to exceed the target LEQ that you've set for yourself. So what will happen is, as this time builds and as the level builds, you'll start to see the green lights diminish, and at a certain point the red lights will start, and they'll start climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. And this is really useful for an audio engineer because you want to still have dynamics in your show. You want to still have the ability to mix dynamically and musically and gas it when you want to and pull things back. If you know you've got a section coming up that you really want to give it some gas, you can look at this and you can see how much space do I have before I exceed, and before someone runs up and gives me a fine for 10 grand because I've blown it, you know. So that's the last part of the puzzle, is integrating this in. And the other thing about this application is that it's calibrated and traceable. So if you're doing log files and pulling in data for loudness in a venue, SPL in a venue, and someone does take you to court and makes a claim, the data set coming from this will hold up if you have a level 1, class 1 system. that data will hold up in court, as opposed to this, which I may have calibrated improperly. This can't be fiddled with. So that's pretty much it for me, unless someone else has more stuff. Fire away if you wish.